what's going on, guys? Legendary Ocelot here, and I'm back for another video. Today, I'm making a guide on how to beat every floor of dungeons as Mage. Doesn't matter if you're in Hardened Diamond, struggling on the entrance floor, or a 3/4 Storm with Wither Goggles Pro trying to get through Master Mode Floor 3. This video will help you. A couple things I want to touch on before I begin is that I'm Kata 18 at this point, and all floors up to floor 5 will be from my experience, but after that is a combination of research and educated knowledge. Also, I'm not going to factor carries, unless a floor is so hard that it can be considered, and only featuring gear available to you when you're trying to beat the floor for the first time, in order to be as friendly to Iron Man players as possible. When I say M1, M2, or M3, I mean Master Mode Floor 1, Master Mode Floor 2, and so on. Also, this video doesn't cover left-to-click mages, as they use completely different setups from your standard right-to-click mage, although I may make a guide on left-to-click mages in the future. Lastly, the minimum Kata level is the absolute minimum to enter the floor at all, but the recommended Kata level is what I would recommend before you attempt your first run. Anyways, let's get started. The entrance floor is the first floor of the catacombs, and the only requirement to enter is a combat level of 15. However, the entrance floor is hard for Mage unless you already have a good Mage setup outside of dungeons. I would suggest that if you don't have at least Wise Dragon Armor and a Frozen Scythe, to play a different class until you reach Kata 5, which then you can use the Dreadlord Sword, a good early game Mage weapon for your buck. If you're going to go for Mage this early anyways, I would recommend a Frozen Scythe and Wise Dragon Armor. For a pet, most people would say at least an epic sheep pet of high level, which is ideal if you can afford it, but if you can't, a common guardian pet will work almost as well, as they are much cheaper and very easily be leveled in a few days by the experimentation table. For talismans, if you are mostly focusing on dungeons, Reforged, Demonic, or Bizarre, but if you are only going to do dungeons on the side, keep your talismans on their usual Reforge. As a Mage, your job is to, unless you're Tank Mage, which doesn't matter till later on, stay back and do ranged AoE damage with your Mage abilities. However, again, I would heavily recommend that unless you have money to burn, to play a different class until you reach a Catacombs level of 5. Floor 1 has a minimum Kata level of 1, and I recommend getting to a Kata level of 2 before attempting, unless you're using the Wise Dragon and Frozen Scythe setup. This is because at Kata level 2, you unlock a new armor set called Heavy Armor. If you're using the Heavy Armor, use 3/4 Heavy Armor with Dark Goggles, which you can buy from Ophelia for 80,000 coins. Starve the armor as much as you can, and reforge the set to Wise. For a weapon, either use Frozen Scythe or grind the Kata 5 to use Dreadlord Sword. For a pet, again, Epic Sheep or Common Guardian. However, if you can afford it, a Legendary Sheep of high level will basically carry you through Floor 1 at this point. If you get the Legendary Sheep, give it a textbook, and you'll have way too much mana for Floor 1. For the boss, again, be careful, and stay back and do your job as a Mage. If you can't quite beat Floor 1, grind a couple more Kata levels at the entrance floor. Floor 2 has a minimum Kata level of 3, and I recommend getting to a Kata level of 5 or 6 before attempting. At this point, you have 3 options for a weapon: a Frozen Scythe, an Epic Dreadlord Sword, or a Bonzo Staff. I've made a video comparing the Dreadlord Sword to the Bonzo Staff, but to summarize, if you don't have a lot of money or you want to save on mana, get the Dreadlord Sword. And if you want better AoE damage as well as slightly more damage, get the Bonzo Staff. But if you get Bonzo Staff, make sure it has at least Ultimate Wise 3. At this point in dungeons, you still won't have a lot of mana. For armor, this is the last floor non-dungeon converted Wise Dragon Armor is viable. And if you're using the 3/4 Heavy of Dark Goggles combo, 5-star the entire set, reforge it all to Necrotic if possible, and if you can afford it, pick up a Bonzo Mask for the revive, as well as for the boss for better effective health. For the pet, again, epic sheep are better, or a common guardian if on a budget. Most people say grind floor 1 until you can do floor 3, but I say unless you're on an Iron Man profile, grind floor 2 for the better Catacombs XP, and anything from floor 1 with the exception of occasionally the Bonzo staff can be bought on auction for cheaper than from the chests, as well as the fact that both Ultimate Wise books from the free and gold chests as well as Scarf Studies are big profit for this point in the game. For the boss, make sure you kill the priest first before anything else, both in the first and second phase. Floor 3 has a minimum kata level 5, and I recommend getting a kata level of 9 or 10 before attempting. I know kata 9 and 10 may seem high at this point, but it doesn't take that long to obtain, and floor 3 is the first floor that can be pretty hard for its point in the game. For armor, I would recommend obtaining 3/4 zombie soldier armor, buying it from the auction house, or grinding floor 3 and quitting before boss to get your set. I would personally recommend a legendary set, but a high quality epic set will do almost as well for much cheaper. The helmet can either be 5-star dark goggles, if you can survive, or a 5-star bonzo mask if you're having trouble. Reforge the helmet, leggings, and boots to necrotic, and reforge the chest plate to loving. For a weapon, again, an epic dreadlord sword. Do not buy a rare one as it won't deal enough damage. Bonzo's staff or frozen scythe will make it. For a pet, you definitely want a legendary sheep pet at this point. It might be expensive, but it will serve you well all across even master mode. Did I say Mage was cheap? For the boss, you want to again be careful. If your team can kill the guardians fast enough, then kill them all at once. But if you cannot, whittle all the guardians down to around 50 to 100,000 health, then kill them all at once. Once you can consistently beat floor 3, grind it out a lot, as floor 4 is going to be extremely difficult for your first run. Floor 4 has a minimum kata level of 9, and I recommend getting a kata level of 13 or 14 before attempting. For armor, I would stick to your 3/4 zombie soldier armor, as it is going to be slightly tankier than adaptive armor. And if you don't have trouble surviving your kata 16 or higher, replace your dark goggles or bonzo mask with shadow goggles, as it's going to give you much more intelligence as well as ability damage. For a weapon, this is going to be the last floor where an epic dreadlord sword is going to be viable. You can also use the bonzo staff or frozen scythe as before. For a pet, I would recommend legendary sheep again. If you're not on an Iron Man profile, you may possibly have to get one floor 4 carry, just so you can use the new items from floor 4. As soon as you get one floor 4 run done, normally or carry, buy a Spirit Scepter. That's going to be so much better of a weapon than anything before. For the boss, be careful. Use your weapon to AoE the spirit animals storing spawns, and killing the spirit bears when they spawn. Floor 5 has a minimum kata level of 14, and I recommend getting a kata level of 16 or 17 before attempting. Floor 5 is the first floor that you can viably dungeonize normal gear and use said items in dungeons. Although the admins have stated in a design thread that they wanted to remove the ability to dungeonize normal gear, so this could change with the release of 1.0. For armor, I would either use shadow goggles of a bonzo mask for safety during the boss, 2/4 super heavy armor, and spirit boots. All 5-starred and 3/4 necrotic with loving on the chest plate. An alternative is 3/4 dungeonized wise dragon armor with shadow goggles or bonzo mask with 5 stars and the same reforges. For weapons, dreadlord sword and bonzo staff should be avoided now, and frozen scythe is only good now if dungeon converted and 5-starred. I would recommend a spirit scepter, 5-starred with ultimate wise 5 as its ability is a huge mana drain. For your pet, I again recommend legendary sheep. For the boss, I would recommend teleporting up to the ledge next to the portal where you entered with your aspect to the end, and when the battle starts, spam your spirit scepter or frozen scythe at the livids until they die. Floor 6 has a minimum kata level of 19, and I recommend getting a kata level 22 or 23 before attempting. For armor, I would recommend either getting 3/4 perfect armor, tier 9 through tier 12, dungeon converted, and 5-star all 3 pieces, and also use shadow goggles, or grind up your kata level a little more and use one of the sets from floor 5. For weapons, I would recommend to use the same spirit scepter from floor 5, and frozen scythe is no longer viable. However, if you're a kata 25 or higher and you can afford it, a dungeon converted 5-star Midas staff will crush anything else in the game except Hyperion. Although make sure at least 100 million was paid for it, as although cheaper ones are still good, they're not going to be very viable for floor 6. For pet, again, use a legendary sheep pet. This floor is going to be hard, and if you can't survive, I'd recommend trying to get a healer and a tank in the party. During the boss, stay back and hit the terracottas with your Spirit Scepter or Midas Staff. If you want to, you can also buy a Livid Dagger. Although it's mainly a Berserker weapon, it's also good for left-to-click capabilities, lifesteal, and mana regen, which is especially important during the boss fight. When the giants spawn, again stay back and do your job as a mage. I would recommend grinding out floor 6 as much as you can before even attempting floor 7, as floor 7 will be very hard. Floor 7 has a minimum kata level of 24, and I recommend getting a kata level 28 or 29 before attempting. For armor, I would recommend getting 3/4 maxed out Necromancer Lord armor from either grinding out floor 6 or buying on the auction house. Pair the set with either Shadow Goggles or Wither Goggles, depending on your kata level. For your weapon, again, Spirit Scepter or Midas Staff, and once again, use your legendary sheep pet. Again, do your job as a mage, and if you're having trouble in this floor, once again, get a tank and healer in the dungeon. Your goal here is to either grind floor 7 or buy Wither armor, and if you can, a Necron blade. For grinding floor 7 for money or items, I would recommend using either 3/4 Storm Armor or 3/4 Goldor Armor if you're having trouble surviving with Storm Armor, and use Wither Goggles. For a weapon, use either Spirit Scepter, Midas Staff, or preferably a Hyperion with Wither Impact on it. M1 has a minimum kata level of 24 and a floor 7 completion, and I recommend getting a kata level of 28 or 29 before attempting. For armor, I would recommend any set from floor 7 that I recommended, and for weapons, this is the last floor where Spirit Scepter is viable, and Midas Staff and Hyperion are also great. For a pet, either a legendary sheep pet, or if you're rich, use a legendary Ender Dragon pet with Chimera on your weapon, which will be slightly better. Strategy is the same as floor 1, just much harder. M2 has a minimum kata level of 26, and I recommend getting a kata level 32 or 33 before attempting. Armor is the same as the last floor, although if you are having trouble surviving, use either a Bonzo Mask or a Diamond Scarf Head. Hyperion is more of a utility weapon at this point, and Midas Staff is still really good for damage, although Archer and left-to-click mages are still better at this point. M2 has the same strategy as normal floor 2. M3 onwards uses the same strategy, but if you use a diamond head, use the head of a floor, and do the same strategy for the floor. In conclusion, Mage is a very good, but also very expensive class. If you're too poor to afford the important pieces of gear for your floor, play Berserker instead. Have a good day, see you in the next one.